Every manager secretly believes one of two things about people. Either your team is lazy and needs watching, or your team wants to do good work and just needs room to do it. You probably don't say this belief out loud, but it's running underneath every decision you make, every check-in you schedule, every deadline you set, without asking why you set it that way. In the 1960s, a psychologist named Douglas McGregor gave these two beliefs names. He called them Theory X and Theory Y. He wasn't describing two types of employees. He was describing two types of managers and the assumptions living quietly in their heads, often without those managers ever noticing the assumption was there at all. Theory X assumes people are inherently lazy. Left alone, they'll avoid work. They need strict rules. They need constant supervision. They need someone standing over their shoulder, because without that pressure, nothing gets done. Theory Y assumes the opposite. It assumes people actually want to do good work. Given the chance, they seek out responsibility. They don't need a babysitter. They need a goal and the freedom to reach it their own way. To understand why McGregor even needed to name these two positions, it helps to know what he was arguing against. Before Theory X and Theory Y, the dominant thinking in management came out of the era of scientific management, the factory floor philosophy that broke work into small, standardized, tightly measured tasks and treated the worker as a kind of interchangeable component in a larger machine. In that world, trust wasn't part of the design. Supervision was the design. McGregor, teaching at a business school in the middle of the 20th century, was pushing back against that inherited assumption, arguing that it wasn't a neutral description of human nature at all. It was a choice, one that produced the very behavior it claimed to be protecting against. On paper, these sound like two competing opinions about human nature. Pick the one that matches reality, and you're set. But that's not actually how McGregor's theory works, and this is where it gets interesting. McGregor found that the belief itself changes the outcome, not just how the manager behaves, how the employee behaves too. Treat someone like they need micromanaging, and eventually, they start acting like they need it. Give someone freedom and trust, and many people rise to meet it. Think about what that means for a second. This isn't a theory about who people already are. It's a theory about who people become, based on how they're treated. The manager's assumption doesn't just describe the employee, it helps create the employee. The belief goes in as a guess and comes out as a fact, manufactured by the very act of holding it. This is a version of something psychologists call a self-fulfilling prophecy. You've probably seen it outside of work too. Teachers who are told a certain student is about to bloom academically tend to treat that student differently, give them more attention, more patience, more benefit of the doubt, and that student often does improve, not because of anything inherent in them, but because of the shift in how they were treated. Tell a kid they're the smart one in the family, and they often start acting smarter, more confident, more willing to try. Tell a kid they're the difficult one, and difficult behavior tends to follow, whether or not it was ever really there to begin with. The label doesn't just describe the person, it shapes them. Now put that mechanism inside an office. A Theory X manager writes detailed checklists. They ask for hourly updates. They review every email before it goes out. On the surface, this looks like diligence. It looks responsible, even admirable. But what it actually communicates to the employee is something colder. I don't trust you to do this without me watching. And people respond to that message, not with more effort, with less initiative. Why would you take a risk? Why would you go above the minimum when the person above you has already signaled they expect the minimum? Theory X doesn't just fail to inspire people, it can actively train them into the exact behavior it was designed to prevent. It becomes a closed loop. Suspicion produces disengagement. Disengagement produces mistakes, and mistakes get read as proof the suspicion was justified all along. A Theory Y manager operates completely differently. They set a goal. They explain why it matters. Then they step back. They trust the employee to figure out the how. This can feel deeply uncomfortable for the manager because it means giving up visibility. It means not knowing every detail of how the work gets done, only that it gets done, and having to sit with that uncertainty instead of resolving it through constant checking. But here's what tends to happen. When people are trusted with ownership, many of them rise to it. They start solving problems before being asked. They start caring about outcomes, not just tasks. Not because they were forced to, because they were finally allowed to. The energy that used to go into managing appearances, looking busy for the person checking in every hour, gets redirected into actually doing the work well. There's a reason this pattern shows up so reliably across different kinds of work, from software teams to sales floors to hospital wards. People are generally more motivated by three things: some meaningful control over how they do their job, a sense that they're getting better at something that matters, and a clear reason the work matters in the first place. Theory X quietly strips out the first of those three. It doesn't matter how clear the goal is or how much someone cares about the mission if every method they choose has to be pre-approved by someone hovering nearby. Theory Y leaves that control intact, which is exactly why it tends to unlock effort that supervision alone can never force out of someone. Coaches understand a version of this instinctively, even when they've never heard of McGregor. A good coach doesn't stand on the field correcting every footstep during the actual game. The correcting happens in practice, ahead of time, through repetition and feedback. Once the game starts, the coach's job shifts to trusting the preparation and letting the player play. A manager standing over an employee's shoulder during the actual work is the equivalent of a coach running onto the field mid-play to grab the ball. It doesn't produce a better outcome. It just proves the coach never trusted the preparation to begin with. Here's an analogy that makes this easier to picture. Think about the difference between a plant you water on a rigid, obsessive schedule, checking the soil every hour, moving it in and out of light constantly, second-guessing every stage of its growth, and a plant you water properly and then leave to actually grow in stable conditions. The obsessive version doesn't grow faster. Often it grows worse, because the constant interference disrupts the very process it's trying to help. Roots need to be left alone underground to do their job. Pull them up to check on them too often, and you kill the thing you're trying to nurture. People aren't so different. Constant checking doesn't protect the outcome. It disrupts it. None of this means Theory Y is always correct and Theory X is always wrong. That's the mistake a lot of people make when they first hear this idea. They assume McGregor is telling managers to just trust everyone completely, all the time, and back off no matter what. That's not what the research actually supports, and it's not what smart application of this theory looks like in practice. A brand new hire, someone who just joined the company and has no track record yet, often genuinely needs more structure. They don't know the systems. They don't know the unwritten rules, the shortcuts, the landmines. Giving them total freedom on day one isn't empowering. It's disorienting, like handing someone the keys to a car in a city they've never driven in and telling them to figure out the route themselves. A little bit of Theory X, in the form of clear guidance and closer check-ins, actually helps them succeed, and helps them get to the point where that structure is no longer necessary. A skilled veteran is a completely different situation. Someone who has already proven, repeatedly, across multiple projects, that they can deliver, thrives under Theory Y conditions. Continuing to micromanage them after they've earned trust doesn't protect quality. It insults their competence, and eventually, it pushes them out the door, often to a competitor who is willing to treat that same competence as real. So the real skill here isn't picking a permanent philosophy and defending it forever, the way people cling to one parenting style or one leadership book as if it were scripture. The real skill is diagnosis. It's looking at the specific person in front of you, at this specific moment in their development, and asking what they actually need right now: structure or freedom, guardrails or room to run. That answer changes person to person, and it changes over time for the same person, which means the manager's job is never finished. It has to be reassessed constantly, not decided once and filed away. Picture two employees on the same team, doing similar work, 6 months apart in tenure. The newer one is still learning where things live, still guessing at unwritten norms, still unsure which decisions are theirs to make alone. Treat that person with pure Theory Y freedom. Hand them a vague goal and disappear, and you haven't respected their autonomy. You've abandoned them. The veteran on the same team, the one who has shipped project after project without needing a single reminder, experiences the exact same checklist as something else entirely. Proof that nothing they've done has mattered. Same tool, same manager. Two completely different effects, because the diagnosis was identical instead of individual. But here's the part nobody expects. And it's the part that actually explains why so many managers get this wrong, even when they know the theory cold. Most managers don't choose theory X because the evidence points to it. They choose it because of anxiety. Micromanaging doesn't usually come from a careful read of an employee's skill level. It comes from a manager's own discomfort with losing control. Letting go feels risky. If something goes wrong on a project you didn't personally check line by line, it feels like it will reflect on you, on your judgment, on your job security. So you check the line. You ask for the hourly update. You demand the checklist, not because the person in front of you has given you any reason to distrust them, but because watching closely feels safer than trusting, even when trusting is the more accurate response to the situation. That's the twist worth sitting with. Theory X often isn't a rational conclusion about a specific employee. It's a default setting that kicks in whenever a manager feels uncertain, and it gets applied indiscriminately, even to people who have already proven, again and again, that they don't need it. The assumption isn't really about them at all. It's about the manager's own nervous system. This is worth separating out clearly, because the two things get tangled together constantly. There's a difference between a manager reading a situation accurately and choosing structure because the evidence calls for it, and a manager reaching for structure because uncertainty itself is uncomfortable, and structure is the fastest way to make that discomfort go away. The first is leadership. The second is anxiety, wearing leadership's clothes. From the outside, in the moment, they can look almost identical. Same checklist, same tone, same request for an update. The difference only shows up when you ask what triggered it. Was it something the employee actually did, or was it something the manager was feeling before the employee did anything at all? And that default has a real cost. It's not neutral. It's not just a slightly less efficient way of managing that evens out over time. Skilled people don't stay in environments that treat them like they can't be trusted. They notice when a manager is second-guessing every decision they make. They notice the hourly check-ins that have nothing to do with actual risk and everything to do with someone else's discomfort. And eventually, they leave, quietly at first, disengaging before they ever hand in a resignation letter, and then formally for somewhere that treats their competence like it's real. Exit interviews rarely say the honest version of this out loud. People tend to cite compensation, or a vague desire for new challenges, because naming the real reason feels confrontational on the way out the door. But ask around informally. Talk to people who've actually left a job over how they were managed, and the pattern shows up constantly in different words. I felt like I couldn't be trusted to do my own job. That sentence is theory X, fully realized, from the other side of the relationship. It's the cost nobody puts on a spreadsheet, because it doesn't show up as a single dramatic event. It shows up as a slow leak of exactly the people a company can least afford to lose. So this is the part where it gets personal, and where the original point of this whole discussion actually lives. Most conversations about management theory treat theory X and theory Y like an abstract debate from a psychology textbook, something that happened in the 1960s and stayed there, filed next to other outdated diagrams from old business school lectures. What's actually interesting about it isn't the theory itself. It's that it functions as a diagnostic tool for your own anxiety, disguised as a management style. If you can catch yourself defaulting to theory X out of discomfort rather than evidence, you've found something more useful than any management framework taught in a seminar. You found the actual pattern running your decisions, the one operating underneath the justifications you tell yourself. Before your next one-on-one, try something specific. Ask yourself plainly, am I treating this person like theory X or theory Y? And then ask a harder follow-up. Does the evidence in front of me actually support that choice, or am I just uncomfortable letting go? Look at their track record, not your nerves. Look at what they've actually delivered, not what your anxiety is telling you might go wrong. If the evidence says they've earned freedom, give it to them, even if it feels uncomfortable. Especially if it feels uncomfortable. That discomfort is often the exact signal that you're about to do the right thing, because the easy move, checking one more time, is almost always the anxious one, not the accurate one. Match your management style to the person in front of you, not to your own fear of letting go, because in the end, that fear is the one variable in this entire equation you actually have control over. You can't control whether an employee will succeed. You can control whether you gave them the actual conditions to try. So go back to that question from the very start. Which of the two things do you secretly believe about people? Watch your next decision closely, the next checklist you almost write out of habit, the next update you almost demand for no real reason beyond your own unease, and you'll find your honest answer. Not the one you'd say out loud in a meeting about culture and trust, the one your actions already gave away. If you've caught yourself defaulting to Theory X when the evidence didn't call for it, or watched someone thrive the moment you finally backed off and let them own it, tell that story in the comments below. I want to hear how it played out for you, and what finally made you let go.